important for us to understand. I was thinking about this as I was planning this week and looking at this, and I was thinking, wow, that is really the function and what has to happen in our church body. You know, we look at our church and we think, well, what's happening with our attendance? What's happening with our, with our finances? What's happening with our ministry? How about this? Let's quit doing what we can do and start doing what God can do. Empowered by God. That's the only way that we can do it. And listen, when people see God at work here, I guarantee you, things will change. God says you are to live your life empowered by me. Now, we think, wow, that would be cool, if we could live our life that way. Well, take a look at this. The Apostle Paul said to the Jews and to the Gentiles, he said in Philippians 4:13, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. And the word for the Greek word for strength is the equivalent to the Hebrew word for empower. It's the equivalent word. It's the exact same word. Equivalent. In other words, you do have that same empowerment. You have that same empowerment that he gave to Jacob. You are empowered by God. Because you can do all things to him who puts his strength, or him who empowers you. God says, I have a ministry. I have a calling on your life that you cannot do on your own. The only way that you can accomplish it is if you are empowered by me to accomplish it. And that's what Paul meant in his letter to the church at Thessalonica when he said in 1 Thessalonians 5:24, the one who calls you is faithful and he will do it. It's life-changing. God's not calling you to do the things that you can do. He's calling you to do the things that only he can do. He's calling us to a life of change. He's calling us to a life that lives beyond our abilities and is totally dependent on his abilities. He's calling us to live empowered by him. One of the things that we need to discover, you've heard me say this often, that God's will done God's way never lacks for God's provision. Well, here's an addendum to this. God's plan done by God's people will never lack for God's power. Unfortunately, in the church today, this is the way we do it. We say, God's plan done by God's people is a huge problem. And we miss out on this incredible authority and privilege that's given to us, and that is to walk empowered by God. I've seen this happen. I've seen it in my life personally. I've seen it in the lives of other people who have accomplished things that there is no way they could have ever accomplished it on their own. Perhaps you have too. Things that you just simply could not do on your own, but you knew that God was doing it. Something that God was doing. There was an empowerment to accomplish what God wanted to accomplish. That's what God's talking about here. He defines your ministry, and your ministry is empowered by him. It's not something that you do. It's something that he does. That's so important for us to understand. Let me ask you something. How big is your ministry? How big is the ministry God has called you to? If it's bigger than you, you're probably on the right track. If it's not, you need to start thinking again, and dreaming, and praying, and listening, and letting God empower you. God's plan done by God's people will never lack for God's power.
Only by your blood, and it's only through your word.